Recently, a Linus Tech Tips video made a bit of a mistake, I'll say, in regards to a HP case that they said was patented, when in fact it was not patented. However, HP has an application. These are really important distinctions, especially in the patent field where, basically everyone's a lawyer. I, however, am not a lawyer, so this is not legal advice. This is just a little bit of a deep dive into, well, we'll start at the high level and we'll say this is a bit of an understanding on basics of patents, but also kind of how I deal with patent research. Patents are really short for granted patents. That granted status is very, very important. Before you have a granted patent, it is just an application. And an application is little more than the background of the problem, a potential solution that you think is novel and inventive, and you have done inventive steps, and that you are the first, and you have disclosed that, as well as citing claims that'll become important shortly. And I want protection. I want to be the owner of that idea and concept for the next 20 years from the date of application filing. So most jurisdictions have a 20-year patent period, but it's not from the date of which it is granted, it is from the date of which it is filed. So your application is meaningless, and it will be revised normally. In almost all cases, it will be revised, especially in the claims. And when it is granted, it kind of goes back to that original date of the application. So that's kind of an important point here, is that until it is granted, it's nothing. So how does something become a patent? Well, you basically have to start off with something that is novel, useful, and inventive in some capacities. So this kind of precludes the idea that just saying clock in whatever, clock in a cable, clock in a pen, clock on a fingernail, any of these things, they're not really inventive. Now, that doesn't stop me from filing an application though. So if I file an application for clock in a pen, what they may find is that there are already other patents out there that relate to this, and that it happens through the very first step after the application is you have an examiner and they start doing a patent review. So you can't patent anything that has been previously patented, so they will search previous patents. If it's very obvious, it'll likely get rejected outright at that stage, and they'll do that through rejection of claims. We'll get to that. Or it's just obvious to anyone in the field. The other thing is public disclosure can invalidate a patent. So if I come up with a very specific idea in order to, say, make a power meter work, and I talk to another company about it, the specifics of that privately, that can be counted as public disclosure. If I make a YouTube video about it, that is definitely public disclosure. Now, the upside to that, though, is it basically invalidates anyone else from patenting the idea. Now, they may still do an application, get a grant, but so long as there is a data element that proves that that invention was publicly disclosed before the patent, then the patent can be basically invalidated. But that's a little more complicated. So some jurisdictions, especially the United States, has very good transparency. Google Patents is actually a really quick and easy resource, but not a definitive resource, for finding applications and grants. And you can tell the difference because, well, at least in the US, it's easy to tell the difference because the number is either like this or it's like this. And those basically, if it has a date at the beginning in the US, you can basically tell it's an application. And thus, until it's granted, it is meaningless. But the US is very good at the transparency side. So I can look up any application, well, almost any application that is in process. So you can actually see the back and forth between both the patent application and the patent office. And you can see how things, sometimes they'll reject claims, sometimes, but usually, eventually there's back and forth, and hopefully, if you are an applicant, you will eventually get granted. I've mentioned claims a couple of times now. So your application is going to have your background of your problem, your invention, kind of showing that it is novel and inventive. And that's all this big text description at the beginning. And then it finally concludes with your claims. Now, you can kind of break it up into 2 or 3 categories, but really it's mainly 2. It's a primary claim and a secondary claim. If you're looking at EU patents, you will notice that there is usually only ever one primary claim. Whereas in the US, there can be multiple primary claims. So your primary claim describes your invention. You might try and file an application that says something such as a pen that includes, and then you list the items, a clock, or a method of timekeeping, a battery, and a display. Your secondary claim might be that you might have an extra feature, such as the aforementioned with an ability to set an alarm. So, for instance, if I have a pen that has the display and a timekeeping thing, but it doesn't have a battery and it somehow gets energy from RF or NFC or something else, or charges a capacitor for some reason, but I also have that alarm function, well, that alarm function would infringe, except I'm missing aspects of the primary claim. So all secondary claims are beholden to the primary claim. If you have, if a competitor's patent lists A, B, C, and D elements, and you have all of those plus E, you are not distinct. That is infringing. But if you are missing one of the ones that they list, so you're always trying to figure out, how can I not have something they describe? And you also have to be very careful with interpretations and the language used. So that's a bit difficult too. One of the things I saw a few years ago is a cycling company claiming that they have a world patent. Guess what? There is no such thing as a world patent. Whenever you see a patent that says WO in front of it, that's a world patent application. That whole thing, it can be used for a couple of reasons. The PCT system can generally be used for either ensuring that you have protections in multiple countries that you want, and you can save some money by, most of the time, things are going to fall in line at the same point. The other side is the PCT will give you an initial finding back, so they will do a prior art search as well. And they charge fees for this, just like all the nationalities to actually process your patent. Their findings, however, will then go to all the countries, and it can usually expedite things a little bit, but it can also make things potentially harder. So you can actually only get a patent in a country, with the exception of the EU. The EU, while the countries have their own patent processes, it is still governed by the EU. So I'm not 100% sure actually exactly how it works, because, for instance, we filed in Italy and then it went to the European Patent Office. So there is an element there, and the European Patent Office is very much like the USPTO, the United States Patent Office and Trademark Office or something. And they're very transparent. But all this is really to say is a patent is only a patent in a country, or the EU. So if I have a patent in Canada, where I live, if someone is infringing on it, but they're only selling their product in the United States, or Italy, or South Africa, or Japan, I have no recourse. Now, if I filed with PCT, I have a direct route and a timeline for capturing those jurisdictions. If I file locally first, my patent will usually go through the process much quicker, but I also have a limited time to file in countries that are under that PCT, assuming I'm filing that patent in a PCT country. So one of the great advantages of filing with the PCT first and getting one of those world applications is you basically get 3 years where no one is really going to contest your application. It's great for startups and new companies or anything that you may not actually be able to get through in that guise, but it adds a scare tactic in a way, or it adds the potential that we could get this patent. So, you don't have a grant, but we're on our process. This is a long process to get the grant, but we don't have it. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about this world and how patents operate, how applications don't mean anything until they're granted. When they're granted, most of those claims will be changed. And if they seem obvious in the application, they're probably going to be changed. And how you want to operate when you talk about patents is important, and that should be first and foremost on the mind of a company that is trying to deal with patents in any way. Is that having clear communication on how the company wants to talk about patents is very important. If they take a non-written approach of you know phone and verbal conversations only when it talks about competitor patents, and or the other end of the spectrum of basically lawyer up, get lawyers to review things, document everything. So it's a weird and wacky world. Jurisdictions are weird, and you have to be mindful of that. There are no world patents, but there are world applications. And even though we call them world applications, they do not include every country, just countries under the Patent Cooperative Treaty. And with that, hopefully you learned a little bit more about patents and how to maybe dig into them a bit with like the patent peer process is one of my favorite things when looking at applications is you can follow it through. It has allowed me to challenge when people tell me no. So with that, hopefully you learned a little bit more about patents and look forward to some more, I'll say, more hands-on content in the future. I've got a bunch of fun projects that have been hanging around since the last year or so, and I'm starting to move them ahead as well as new products coming. So that's under Titan Lab though, so no worries about that. With that, take care.